Tonight's video has 6 terrifying tales, from a story involving a park ranger who stumbles across something mysterious, to stories involving humanoids, creepers, and the paranormal. We will be covering a range of different topics. A huge thank you to the writers who allowed me to share these stories. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, likes and comments are always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Do you ever notice how many trees there are? I've heard it said there are more trees than stars in our galaxy. Amazing to think about, isn't it? That something as big as a star should be outnumbered by the trees on our planet. In our galaxy, at least. It's a lot of trees, and they're all very old, aren't they? So very old. Older than us. Maybe, somewhere out there, is a tree older than the dinosaurs, buried in a mountain, somehow having survived millions of years. I know we find fossils of trees, but what if those fossils weren't dead? It's interesting to think about, that there could be a tree out there older than all of mankind's history. Do you think trees have thoughts? After all, trees are alive, and every living thing has some kind of mind and intelligence driving it. And if so, what do they think of us? I've got a fair idea of what they think about humankind. I'm a park ranger, and this is my story. It all began when we got a call none of us wanted to receive. A child had gone missing. This wasn't unusual. People go missing all the time in the parks. However, what made this one unusual was how it happened. Maxie Patton had been out with her mother on a picnic. At 13 years old, he was a wild and rambunctious child. And if there was one thing he loved doing more than any other, it was climbing trees. If only he'd been more of a video game kid than an outdoors kid, perhaps all this could have been avoided. You see, it was when he was climbing a tree that he disappeared. His mother recounted everything in detail. They picked out a nice clearing on the edge of the woods, near a large clump of trees Maxie could climb on as he pleased. We set up the blanket right here. Maxie wanted to climb that big pine tree. She pointed to it. I took my eyes off him for only a moment. She sobbed. Just 1 minute. And when I looked back, he was... Then she utterly broke down. The first thing we did was check out the tree in question. It was a pine tree, one of the tallest I'd ever seen. Clearly it was very old. How high up was he when he vanished? I asked his mother. A little skeptical, a kid could just disappear without a trace while climbing a tree. He was halfway up. Then she continued sobbing. After that, it was obvious we weren't going to get anything else out of her. Still, I walked around that tree twice, and I could clearly see the snapped branches and twigs where Maxie had climbed up. They ended at about halfway up. It was like he'd just stopped climbing then disappeared completely. We did a thorough search of the area first and found nothing. Well, almost nothing. See, about 50 yards from the pine tree I found a shoe, covered in pine needles and tree sap. It was red and blue, a Nike brand symbol on the side. It seemed to have been there for a long while, but when I bent down and picked it up, what I found inside planted the first seed of doubt, that this wasn't just a case of a woman losing track of her child. There, written in black permanent marker, was a name, Maxie Patton. So how did it get here? Maxie's mother was hysterical, and became even more so when I brought the shoe to her. That's it! That's my Maxie's shoe! She grabbed it, clutching it close to her chest as she wailed and wailed. We had to take her away. Taking the shoe from her was difficult, both physically and emotionally. That woman held the shoe to chest like it was a baby. I'll never forget how much that woman cried as she was taken away. Sad to say, but the shoe was the only evidence we had of Maxie and where he'd gone. She was escorted to the park center where she'd wait for the paramedics. We know that she wanted to help, but in her condition, she'd only be a hindrance. The moment she was out of sight, however, was when one of my partners spotted Maxie's blue shirt at the top of another pine tree, hanging from a branch by the collar, 100 yards in the opposite direction of where we'd found his shoe. He swore up and down that the shirt hadn't been there when we'd first looked, and did so with such conviction that none of us doubted him, even if we wanted to. We knew we had to get that shirt down somehow. It was evidence. But then again, how had the shirt gotten up there? Unlike the pine tree Maxie had disappeared from, this one had no sign of anyone having climbed on it. No broken twigs and branches slightly bent from where someone had climbed up and left the shirt. There were 5 of us when we went to first look for Maxie, excluding myself. We didn't think we'd need that many, because frankly, people go missing in the parks all the time. Often they'd turn up in about a few hours. But we'd never dealt with something like this. Staring up at that shirt, covered in pine needles. I think it began to dawn on all of us that we were dealing with something we weren't trained for. We radioed for backup while trying to figure out how to get the shirt down. I volunteered to climb up. The very first branch I grabbed, however, broke in half instantly, in the process scratching me across the hand. I cried out, looking at the gash across my palm. It wasn't deep, but the skin had been broken. Blood was already pooling in it. Groaning at the sharp pain, I clenched my hand into a fist, trying to stifle the bleeding. I glared, stunned, at the large branch which had just snapped when I touched it. My blood was already seeping down it and towards the ground, where it dropped onto the exposed roots of the pine tree below. Shit, I cried, turning back around to the others while clutching my wounded hand in my still healthy one. Park rangers always carry a first aid kit on hand, and they quickly helped me apply bandages to it, wrapping my hand in cotton. What happened? One of the other park rangers asked me, looking at the broken branch ludicrous. It just broke. I snapped back despite myself. My agitation at having been cut by the tree branch when it broke was severe. But then something else dawned on me. How had that tree branch cut me? It broke in the grip of my hand, and shouldn't have been able to move in such a way as to leave a mark this painful. Inadvertently, a shiver went down my spine. I became acutely aware of how many trees were around us. Was I mistaken, or had their number increased since I'd last checked? I had to be mistaken. We need to split up and find Maxie, another park ranger said. I was thankful, given it meant I didn't have to focus on the trees anymore. What about the shirt? Another said, indicating the garment at the top of the tree. We'll come back for it later. The first one said dismissively, You know, it's strange. For the life of me, I cannot remember their names. See, I was still new at that time. A rookie, really. I barely even knew what I was doing. I never saw any of the other park rangers involved in the search for Maxie Patton again. Most of them retired or transferred to a different park. But sometimes, I do wonder if we all came back from that search. We split up into 3 pairs, moving in a perimeter from Maxie's last known location, the pine tree. I was paired up with a man whose name escapes me. I just know he was Hispanic, and that's all I can ever remember about him. We were sent north, in case Maxie, or whatever was left of him, had somehow gotten there. The others went east and west. If we found anything, we had to radio it in and then come back. If we found a body, we had to leave it undisturbed. That was obvious, of course, but I really hoped we wouldn't find anything, because what we'd found so far just didn't sit right with me. How did his shoe get 50 yards from his last known location? As I thought back to the moments when I had found that shoe, I began playing it over and over in my head. Something was nagging me about it. Hey pal, said my partner. What? I replied. You ever climbed trees as a kid? I nodded. My face was beaming as I thought back to those happy days. When my partner grimaced, however, I blinked confused. What's wrong? Shaking his head, my partner muttered something in Spanish under his breath before he answered. I did too, a few times, but... He stopped walking and turned to face me. One time when I was climbing a tree, something happened. What? I asked, curious if this had anything to do with our current search. It was back in Mexico, before my family immigrated to the States. There was a tree in my abuelo's backyard. I climbed it every time I went over. One day, when I climbed to the very top, I was looking out over the entire land around my abuelo's house. Felt like I was king of the world. Then I saw it. Saw what? My partner didn't answer. He opened his mouth, paused, then slowly closed it, shaking his head. He wouldn't believe me. He sighed then, opened his mouth to say something, when his eyes widened so large he looked like a fish. He was looking at something behind me. Furrowing my brow, I began to turn around when he grabbed my arm in a vice-like grip. Don't. He hissed through clenched teeth. Don't look. couldn't help myself. I wished I had taken his advice when my eyes found the blue shirt of a young boy hanging from the bottom branches of a tree with a broken branch. Probably about 100 meters away, blood was dripping from it onto the roots below. My heart began beating in my chest so fast I thought it would burst. "That's impossible," I muttered, then blinked. What I saw the moment my eyes opened will forever haunt me. The tree had come closer. My partner began cursing, letting go of my arm and stumbling back. He crossed himself, saying silent prayers. "We have to go," he said with a shaking breath. "Now." I didn't argue. Instead, I began running, my partner right next to me the whole time. I didn't dare look back once, and neither did he. All thought of finding Maxie was gone. For all intents and purposes, he might as well not exist. At that moment, all that mattered was getting away from that tree. Exhaustion caught up with us eventually, though, and we stopped, panting as we tried to catch our breath. "Did that just happen?" I said through my painful gasps of air. "Did that actually just happen?" "I don't know, amigo," said my partner. "Did you see it move?" I asked him. "No," he answered, "but I saw the others moving." "What?" "Their branches and leaves were moving," he answered. "You heard that, right?" I nodded. By this point, I was thoroughly done with everything. For lack of a better term, this was just too crazy. I was watching them for a while. He continued, wondering why they were moving with no wind about. Then, what? I asked him. He looked me grimly in the eyes. "I saw a boy," he said. The branches moved aside, only briefly, but I saw the body of a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 13, but, amigo, we mustn't find that body. I didn't want to ask, but curiosity got the better of me. Why? Because that thing could never be called human, not after they're finished with it. What do you mean, finished with it? My partner didn't answer. Instead, he began praying again in a shaking voice, crossing himself over and over. What was happening to Maxie's body? I pressed, not consciously. He didn't answer me at first. Instead, he licked his lips, looking around us, eyes darting from one spot to another. When he spoke, his voice was low and shaking, the same thing I saw in my abuelo's backyard when I was a child. I didn't say anything to that. I just sat on a stone, leaning backward until my partner grabbed my shoulder. "Don't," he whispered. "There's a tree behind you." I didn't need to look to know he was right. It was obvious anyway. We hadn't left the forest after all. What do we do? I asked him. I kept my eyes on his face intently, because looking anywhere else meant seeing a tree. Ignore them, he said firmly. They might leave us alone if we do. So we did. We just sat on the ground facing each other, catching our breath. I could hear the singing of birds, the gentle flow of a stream nearby, but the only thing I could pay attention to was the sounds the trees made. The soft creaking of wood, the swaying of leaves and branches on this windless day, the trees brushing against each other. Neither of us said anything, just looked at the ground to avoid the awkwardness of staring at each other's faces for who knows how long. The silence between us was marked by our tense patience. Something was going to happen. We could feel it. Even after running from that thing for God knows how long, I didn't believe we'd escaped it. It was still out there, waiting, just like us. I've heard stories about how some hunters track their prey. They shot it first, critically wounding it, then follow the blood trail it leaves behind, waiting for it to collapse from exhaustion. Why bother letting it put up a struggle when you can wait it out? I remember those stories when I looked at my hand. The cotton around my palm was soaked a crimson red. Why is this happening? I asked my companion. He said nothing, just stared at the ground. I've never heard of this before, I continued, my voice dull and tired. I've heard stories of Bigfoot, Mothman, even freaking dogmen in Michigan. Some people say they've seen aliens, others, goblins and fairies. And they always say they see them in the woods, peeking around a corner, watching them, hiding behind something, like a rock or a... I couldn't say it, because they were still all around us, listening. but I've never heard of anyone being hunted by a tree. When I said that, I don't know why I did. I guess accepting the reality of what was happening would make it easier. It didn't. Because when my partner looked up at me suddenly, I could see it in his eyes. He was disappointed in me. I was talking in the presence of other trees. I didn't care. This was just too weird. Any rational part of my brain was long since dead, unable to deal with how bizarre this was. I wondered if my partner was going through the same thing. Then again, he claimed to have experienced this thing before. Are we sure they're trees? He said slowly, like he was talking to a child. What? I answered, and eyes narrowed. My father once told me a story. It was about a demon possessing a woman he knew as a child. He said she went raving mad, biting people and scratching her face. When he finished, I couldn't help but wonder if demons only possessed people. Are you saying a demon has possessed a tree and is hunting us? Maybe, he answered. Who knows? I mean, how do we even know if that thing was a tree? Looked like one to me, I replied, trying not to peek over my shoulder to see if it was behind me. But trees don't move that fast, and they don't carry around pieces of clothing. They don't chase people. You said you saw them with a boy's body, I pointed out. My partner swallowed, crossing himself. I did. I wish I hadn't, but I did. And let me tell you, amigo, trees aren't capable of doing what was happening to that boy. I didn't say anything. The sun broke through the leaf canopy above us, and I squinted from the glare. So did my partner. Part of me thought he made a compelling case, but another felt like there was something we were missing. Missing. That was it. When a tree falls, I said, and no one is around, what sound does it make? My partner furrowed his brow, confused. How do we know trees don't chase people down? How do we know they can't move in the blink of an eye? Or take a young boy without anyone noticing and carry away his body? What are you saying? That trees are capable of doing that? Maybe they are, I replied. Maybe we aren't the first to have seen them either. You think there might be others? When you were a kid, you saw something in your grandfather's backyard, right? Something involving trees? Through the sun's glare, I could see his face going pale. Maybe you were one of the lucky few to live and tell the tale. What? He said, mouth hanging open. When a person goes missing in the savannah, some people believe they were killed by the local wildlife, and nobody doubts that. Africa is full of dangerous beasts. I let that sink in. Let my partner begin to understand what I was going to say before I finished. When a person goes missing in the forest, sometimes people assume they were killed by the local wildlife. Mountain lions, bears, wolves. But nobody ever stops and thinks about the trees all around us. Because nobody ever notices them. I pressed my lips together when I finished. My partner looked at me in disbelief and horror, dumbfounded. Do you have any proof? He said slowly. Same amount of proof as you do for demons possessing trees. Only a theory. Then my partner's face brightened with a dark realization. What if we're both wrong? I blinked. My mind began racing with possibilities. What if we were both wrong? What if this wasn't trees or demons, but something else entirely? If it was, then what was after us? I was about to say something when I noticed it. The shadow which had fallen between us, perfectly still on the ground. Like a border keeping us apart. A long, thick black line. One with several appendages sticking outward from it. My heart skipped a beat as my eyes widened. I knew my partner saw it when he cursed, screaming and backing away. However, there was one part of the shadow which made my blood run cold. One of the appendages was broken, and from it hung the silhouette of a shirt. And slowly, very slowly, it was getting bigger. Unable to help myself, I began following the shadow's trail to its source, knowing full well what had made it. I could just see it in my peripheral vision, like a patient hunter waiting for its prey to roll over and die, when I heard the most comforting sound in my life. The distant hum of a car speeding down the road, passing us by. I turned back to my partner, locking eyes with him. At that moment, we both had the same idea. It was our chance of getting out of this nightmare. Neither of us knew if it would work, but we didn't have a choice, because the shadow had nearly doubled in size, and a tree was creaking very loudly. We ran faster than I ever have in my life, before or since. We ignored everything around us, especially the silent, inescapable trees. We ran across their roots, pushed through their leaves, ducked under their branches, swerved to avoid running into their trunks. I didn't care if I touched them anymore. If I was fast enough, I could get away from them. Then they wouldn't catch me. But what about that infernal creaking? Always right on our heels. What would happen when it stopped? We couldn't be near it when that happened. Our very lives depended on it. So caught up in sprinting out of those godforsaken trees, I didn't think to look at my path. My foot hit something large and solid, and I cried out, losing my balance. My partner was in front of me, and looked over his shoulder, bewildered. He stopped and reached out his arms. I grabbed onto them and planted my foot back on the ground, pushing myself forward. Both of us kept running. We didn't need to check what I had tripped on. It was bound to happen at some point. We'd been running over them for ages. When we saw the gray asphalt of the road, my heart leaped for joy. The creaking behind us had become distant, growing fainter and fainter. I knew damn well we were safe the moment we reached that road, and then I felt something brush against my back, something I knew all too well. The hard, rigid texture of tree bark. The next thing I knew, I was laying on my back against the burning asphalt, panting as I caught my breath. My partner was bent over me, his face obscuring the sun. There were tears running down his face. "I saw it touch you," he said to me, weeping. "It was close, amigo, so close. I've never seen anyone run as fast as you did. We're safe now." He began murmuring, "We're safe. Praise the Lord, we're safe." I didn't say anything, just grunted as I pushed myself off the asphalt. I didn't remember even setting foot on it. My body ached and my lungs demanded oxygen, which I was only too eager to provide. I looked back at the woods we'd come out of. Marked by broken twigs and foliage, pressed into the ground, was the spot we'd both burst from onto the asphalt. Beyond it, I saw only trees, and not a single blue speck anywhere. I smiled, relieved, and stood up, glancing to the other side of the road, and my smile vanished when I saw the blue shirt laying on the edge of it. The inside of the collar was facing me, and on the white tag was a name written in black marker, Maxie Patton. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell my partner. He thought we were safe. Why should I take that away from him? Instead, both of us went back to the ranger station, tired, thirsty, and starving. The other pairs had already beaten us to the station. When we arrived, they'd been trying to work the radio, but stopped when they saw us come in. Nothing happened to them. They didn't find anything either. They didn't ask where we had been for the last 3 hours. They knew better than to do that. Nobody ever tried in the days that followed either. We didn't tell anyone about what happened. Some things are better left forgotten. A couple of weeks later, my partner resigned. Intense emotional trauma as his reason. I did the same thing 3 months later. I didn't keep in contact with him. He didn't try to. Instead, I moved to the city, surrounded by buildings and cars in the modern world. I avoid the parks, gardens, anywhere a single tree is. I stay away from it. I've always believed it was the only way to keep myself safe. I do enjoy going to a park my apartment overlooks. There are no trees there, only grass and bushes. That is, until I'm not sure what to do anymore. Because I had a dream last night. There was a pine tree in my apartment, and one of the lower branches is broken. I thought it was just a symptom of my trauma. Then I saw that tree in the park, and it's getting closer. When I was in my early 20s and in college, I moved out of my parents' house to live in a flat with roommates closer to campus. I remember being nervous but excited, because although I had little understanding of what living alone was like, I was eager to begin my adulthood and experience independence. My mom was really sad and worried, as I was her youngest and last to leave the nest, but she and my dad were proud to see me growing up. I've always had anxiety, so they promised they would visit me once in a while to make sure I had food and soap. My roommates were both guys, about my age, and growing up with only sisters, it was like having the brothers I never had. They were both really caring and genuine, and we quickly became good friends. We were all going to the same school, so it was easy for us to commute together and participate in the same events together, as our schedules matched up. Matt was a sociology major, and we spent endless hours gaming and chatting into the morning and weekends. Damien was getting a psychology degree, and he was always reliable for help with anything. Leaking faucet? Call Damien. Boyfriend dumped you? Damien will talk to you. He was an all-around great guy, and we joked about him being the dad of the house. It was about 4 months after I moved in that I started to see it. My bedroom was at the back of the house, which was likely used as a nursery before it was repainted, considering the leftover animal wallpaper in the closet. The house itself, I believed, was built in the 60s, and converted into suites likely when the original boomer owners moved out. The head of my bed was under the window, while the foot was towards the closet doors. Sometimes when I was sleeping, I would wake up thinking I heard talking. It sounded like two people whispering. Whenever I would open my eyes and turn on my lamp though, there was never anyone there. I remember after being kept up all night by the whispers, I got super mad at Matt and Damien for staying up so late talking, but they both denied it was them. It was creepy, and they were both creeped out about it. The first nights I actually saw the thing was when I stayed up studying. I was at my desk, which faces away from my closet, and I had headphones in. Checked my phone, and it was 1 AM, and I decided it was time to finish up. As I was closing my books, I could hear the whispering again through my headphones. It was creepy because this time I knew I wasn't dreaming. I took my headphones out and turned around. In my closet there was a creature thing. The first word that popped into my head when I saw it was skinwalker, because it was naked and pale and vaguely humanoid. It had huge black eyes, an elongated face, and it crouched in my closet on very long bony limbs. As I stared at it, I slowly just walked towards my door, never taking my eyes off it. However, as I started to move out of sight, I could see its long fingers reaching around the wall as if to follow me. I just flew the door open and ran into Damien's room. He was asleep and I jumped on him in the bed, screaming for him to wake up. He obviously was confused, but when I told him there was something in my room, he jumped up and I followed him hesitantly back to my room. He spent a few minutes looking around, looking under the bed and in the closet, but the thing was gone. I was so frightened though that he let me sleep in his bed while he slept on his bedroom floor. We eventually concluded that the stress from school was getting to me. I slept on the couch for a few days, but eventually decided it wasn't real, and went back to my own bed. Within a week of going back, the voices woke me up again. It sounded like there were 2 or 3 people sitting in my closet, arguing with each other. But it was just quiet enough that I couldn't make out what they were saying. Whenever I checked, there was never anyone there. I eventually landed on the conclusion that I was experiencing some form of sleep paralysis. The next time I saw the creature was after I had awoken to the whispering. Like so many other nights, I turned on my lamp and got out of bed, expecting to see no one when I opened my closet. I screamed when I pulled back the door, and the skinwalker thing was there, within 6 inches of my face, smiling at me. Both Matt and Damien came in, and Damien again let me sleep in his room because I was so frightened. We had a house meeting, and decided that because it was my closet triggering my sleep paralysis, Matt offered to switch rooms with me. Again, these guys were some of the nicest people I've ever met, and they were both genuinely concerned about my mental health. Around Christmas time, Matt and Damien were both out of town with family. I stayed over at my parents' house for a few days too. When I went home on Boxing Day, it was late. I was still spooked about the house in general, so being alone made me feel uneasy. Every creak the wood made my heart skip. I couldn't fall asleep because I was terrified that when I opened my eyes, the skinwalker would be there. I passed out eventually, and woke up to scratching on my bedroom door. We don't have any cats or anything, so I immediately started panicking. I rolled over to grab my phone off the nightstand when I realized crouching on my floor, watching me, was the skinwalker. It was sitting there, almost smirking, watching me panic. My phone was right next to its head. I don't know if it was because I was tired, or terrified, or angry that this thing kept staring at me, but I asked it, "What do you want?" It cocked its head as I spoke, and looked like it was thinking. After a few seconds, it opened its mouth very wide, and the whispers came from its mouth. It was the voices of several people coming from its mouth, but it just held its mouth open, like some kind of speaker. The exact same voices that were coming from my closet. I hid under my blankets because I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. Eventually the whispering stopped. The scratching stopped eventually too. I didn't sleep, just stayed under the blanket waiting to die essentially. When my roommates came in, I told them about it. Damien suggested I see a counselor, because he believed it was due to my stress, and I agreed. My counselor basically told me I should see a psychiatrist first, as what I was experiencing was very concerning. When I saw my psychiatrist, she interviewed me for about an hour, and then told me she believed I was schizophrenic. That was really scary, as I have no family history of mental illness, and I was convinced it was just anxiety. She gave me medication to try, and that was it. The first night on the medication was the best sleep I had ever had in that house. I heard no voices all night, and I actually felt safe and calm. I had my doubts that I was actually schizophrenic, because what I saw was so real. But since I started the meds, I haven't heard the whispers or seen the skinwalker. I was hesitant to tell Damien and Matt about what the psychiatrist said. I was worried they would think I was crazy or dangerous, like I thought schizophrenic people were. At the time, I also didn't think I had it, as I still thought it was just anxiety. However, it didn't matter much, because I didn't really see much of Damien or Matt after that. I would see them milling about the kitchen from time to time, or hear them in the bathroom, but they both seemed to constantly be getting ready to leave to go out. I was worried they had somehow found out about it, and were avoiding me on purpose. After about a month, I came home from school, to find both Matt and Damien's rooms were empty. Completely empty. Like there was no trace they were ever there. There wasn't even a crumb on the bedroom carpet. I was so hurt that they left. That they didn't tell me they were leaving. I felt betrayed. I felt it was somehow my fault. My mom came to visit that afternoon, and I expressed to her how upset I was about my roommates leaving. I remember she looked confused, and asked me some dumb questions like, "What did you say their names were?" And "How long were they here?" My mom and I set up a meeting with my landlord to talk about how my rent would change with them gone. Now at the time, I was in full denial about my condition. I thought I was just stressed out and needed to sleep more. But when I met with the landlord, I changed my mind. He told me my rent wouldn't change, because my living circumstance hadn't changed. Nobody had moved out, because nobody else had lived there with me. It blew my mind. It made me question everything. I didn't know what to do, and to be honest, I had a major mental health crisis. I'm better now, but I thought I would share my story. My family knows, and I'm living a much more stable life now. To Matt and Damien, I know you're not real, but you truly were great friends. You taught me how to be emotionally strong, how to have good humor in poor circumstances. I'll never forget you, and I'm sorry I couldn't actually meet you. I've worked as a cop for nearly 2 decades. I've seen some messed up stuff in my day. Anything from gut-wrenching vehicular accidents to victims of what could be deemed as a Jason Voorhees attack. I've seen every imaginable kind of crime. I've seen many kinds of human organs I'm not supposed to see in person, at least not in a fresh state. I've seen everything, literally everything at this point. I can say that the passage, "What has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun," applies to me very much. Nothing surprises me anymore. Well, almost nothing. There was this one time when something caught me off guard when I thought I had seen everything there is to see under the sun. I thought it would be just another day because I was so confident in myself, because I was so confident in my experience with the scum of the earth. I was terribly wrong that one time. On the 22nd of December 2015, I was called in to check out an apartment. The neighbors had complained about an awful smell that was present in the apartment a few days without being tended to. I expected some junkie or alcoholic not noticing a bad leak or something. Though if I'm being honest, I was aware of the possibility an elderly person had died in that apartment with no one noticing. I was right about someone dying in that apartment. I was wrong about everything else. Instead of it being some old person who had died because of natural causes, it was a 30-something-year-old man who died because of, well, I don't know. No one knows really. It's a cold case. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Anyway, we received the call and then made it to the apartment block. The putrid smell was striking all the way from the stairway leading up to the 3rd floor, on which the apartment was located. I'm surprised the residents hadn't called us earlier. It's not like one gets to enjoy the stench of iron mixed with spoiled eggs from their floors below every day. I swear, with each passing step upwards, the smell got worse. It was so bad my head began throbbing by the time the door of the apartment was in sight. Jan, one of the boys that were with me, wasn't too pleased with the odor. He banged as hard as he could on the door for a while, demanding the owner of the apartment open it. The door swung open on the 3rd or 4th time his fist made contact with it. That was suspicious, to say the least. I instinctively grabbed my gun, but I didn't pull it out. Just had my hand on it in case something might go wrong. All 3 of us called out to the owner of the apartment, and we cautiously made our way inside. No sound came back. The moment I entered the apartment, I felt like I was being punched repeatedly in the face by that disgusting odor. My eyes were watering. I screamed out for the owner, demanding to know what was the source of the rancid stench. Jan found the source of the smell. It wasn't a pleasant sight to say the very least. I could hear it in his voice. It was shaky. Uncharacteristic. That man's usually behaving like a modern-day Viking, but at that moment his voice was shaky, like that of a scared child. Found it. His voice trailed off as me and Chris made our way towards the guest room. I wanted to throw up when I saw it. I felt my stomach twisting and turning into a spasming knot. I felt my lunch going upwards. There was this guy, completely flayed. Someone had stripped the skin off his body. He was just seated there against the wall, all covered up in dried, darkened blood. It was awful. I couldn't handle the sight, but I simply couldn't look away either, so I just stared at it for about a minute while Chris and Jan just stood there with me, speechless. The 3 of us just stood there dumbfounded and almost mesmerized by this lump of meat in front of us. Hell, the guy being skinless wasn't the worst part of it. His skin was placed back on him like it was some kind of suit. It had this sickly yellow tint to it. I'll never forget that image. I can never forget the image of a skinless man with his own skin draped over his body like a suit. No matter how hard I try, it always creeps up to me in the back of my mind. It's something that sticks with a man for life. Hell, I still even remember that goddamn smell. Once I finally managed to pry my eyes away from the abomination, I noticed that the wall behind him was covered in a text written in blood. There were a bunch of short phrases all over. Help me. I'm stuck. I don't belong here. Help me. Help. Hell. God. Let me out. Let me out. Help, please. Shapeless things. There was one piece of text that made my insides turn upside down. The letters were tiny, so small I had to walk over to the wall and look at it up close to make out what was written. I wish I hadn't. I wish I didn't read that piece of text. It said, "They are peeling it off of me," before trailing off into larger letters that spell, "Kill me." I felt the hair all over my body standing up as I stared at the wall. In my mind, someone was sick enough to flay a man, dress him up in his own skin, and then also use his blood to try to make it look like some supernatural crap. That thought alone made me both sick and scared. Few people are capable of such vile brutality. I say this because the amount of work needed to flay a human so precisely isn't something criminals would bother with. If some mobster wanted to torture him, it would have looked far messier. Same with most murder-happy folk. I was trying to process the whole ordeal. The wall began moving towards me. It took a moment to notice at which point I fell flat on my ass, blurting out a barrage of F-bombs, prompting my partners to stare at me like some rookie. I screamed that I saw the wall moving towards me, but they didn't believe me. Chris called the station to report our findings and to call for backup. At the same time, Jan helped me back to my feet and made me look around the house with him. We found nothing inside. Absolutely nothing. I swear I could see this black spherical mass in one mirror, and it had this creepy cartoonish face on it. 2 white orbs for eyes, and a long white slit with jagged edges for a smile. It startled me, forcing me to blink. Once my vision refocused, it was gone. It was just a mirror. We found nothing in that apartment. Literally nothing. It was clean. After a whole investigation of the ordeal, nothing was found. One day the owner was fine. 6 days later, he was a hellspawn from Hellraiser. Just like that, out of the blue, a guy was murdered by getting flayed alive in his apartment with no one noticing. Just like that. Nobody even complained about any fighting noises or ungodly screaming as one would expect. It was as if he suddenly just dropped dead, in a very painful and disturbing fashion, but still as if it happened in a flash. I told Jan about the mirror thing when we were out of there, but he says it's probably me being shocked for the first time in years that led me to imagine things, and I took his word for it. I didn't think about it until 2 days ago, when we received another call at our station regarding the same apartment. This time, strange noises were coming out of there at night, according to the residents. There shouldn't be any noises coming out at night. As far as I know, nobody has lived there since the flayed guy. I must tell this story before they find me. I'm writing this on a library computer on an account I made to tell the story. For this story to make sense, there's 3 things about me to keep in mind. I'm a female, I lived in Tucson, Arizona my entire life, and I speak fluent Spanish. Back in 2016, I lived in a small apartment near 12th and Valencia, the same main street as the airport, and if you go several miles down Valencia, you can visit the Saguaro National Park. Though the street more or less becomes off-roading past Wilmont, it's more or less a straight line. My boyfriend I lived with in the apartment knew this, and thought we should spend a day out there. We took his old truck out there. I'm not an expert on automobiles in any form. All I know is that it was a Chevy, and my boyfriend, we'll call Adrian, would often talk about the lift kit he put on it, so that it was raised even higher off the ground. If I asked him, he could probably give a lot more details on that truck. But that's not important to the story. All that really needs to be known is that it's great for off-roading, and we often went up on the mountains together in it. It was a cloudy day in November. I'd say it was still probably 80 or so degrees out when we went to spend the day at the national park. We'd been planning it for ages, and I was really excited for this, but that was all going to change. I remember this, since it's been haunting me for nearly 3 years. We had spent the majority of the day hiking and smoking weed in an assortment of different locations, just enjoying the cacti and the snacks we brought along. It was starting to get late. It was getting on to be winter, so it was dark at around 5 p.m, and yet we weren't even back in the truck at about 8 p.m. We were sat inside. The truck was off with the windows open. I was hitting a bowl when Adrian put his hand up. Having thought he wanted some, I was about to offer it to him. Before I could speak, he put his hand over my mouth and held up a single finger. Having been sat in the dark for hours, my eyes were well adjusted, and the glow he pointed out to me in the distance took all of my attention. What appeared to be some sort of firefight was about 100 or so meters in front of us, but behind us was a sound of movement. It was like a group of animals thrashing about. Adrian turned on the truck, keeping the headlights off, to roll up the windows, before promptly turning it back off. I was so out of it at the time, I wasn't really sure what was happening. All I was really sure of was that we needed to keep quiet and remain alert. When the thrashing sound came closer, it was apparent that it was stomping and chanting. They were clapping and chanting about Santa Muerte. Now Adrian doesn't speak Spanish, though he's full Mexican. He just never learned, so I ended up whispering the translation to him. It was like one of those prayers on the candles you can buy. It spoke about asking the Holy Death for blessing, but I don't remember what they wanted very clearly. What I do remember was the slam of a hand on the hood of the truck, and the wild eyes of a boy. He looked to be somewhere between 17 and 20, not very old, but not a young teen either. He had white paint around his dark eyes, and it haunts me in my dreams. To the best of my knowledge, This boy was all who knew of us in that moment. Adrian swore, but he didn't move. Instead, he just watched the boy, and I watched him. Adrian has always been the type of guy who's confrontational, and he's always been insistent on solving any issues we face. And being someone who hates confrontation, I was rather reliant on him to face issues for me. The boy yelled for others to surround the truck in Spanish. In the moment, something in me snapped, and keeping my eyes trained on the mirror on the passenger side, I told him to reverse. Darting my eyes back and forth between the boy and the figures coming out from the cacti, as Adrian reversed and turned in a huge jerky motion, before hitting the uneven road. We were originally just parked at the side of the road. The feeling of being watched, hunted even, compelled me to tell him to head downtown, where we ended up spending a few hours at Shot in the Dark, a cafe that's long since closed. For 2 months following that night, I gradually got more and more paranoid about it, and thought Adrian tried to convince me that I was overreacting, and there was no chance we'd ever encounter them again. I just couldn't believe him, despite how desperately I wanted to. It was when we were nearing 3 months since that night, when the previously fixed hand dent was back, and heavily multiplied. It was like dozens of hands tried to peel the metal back to get in. I haven't had any other events since Adrian had his truck fixed and sold, but recently he bought a similar one, and the paranoia has been seeping back into my bones. When I'm not at work, I don't leave my house unless I'm going to be indoors, because I can't risk them finding me again. The thought of them finding me vulnerable, alone or not, it leaves me shaken. I can't remember what they wanted, but I remember the way he smiled when he mentioned wanting to get into the truck, and to have us surrounded, and I would rather I never found out what he planned that night. It started about a week ago yesterday. I still don't know how it took so long for me to catch on. I guess I now know what's been going on. I am a 22-year-old female. I've been told I am pretty, and I don't have any trouble getting a date. But I am not pretty enough that I get second looks on the street. Besides the usual attraction of youth, there are my icy blue eyes, thanks to my mom, and jet black hair, thanks to my dad. I am a soon-to-be college graduate with a business degree from a mid-level university. Although I've had professor after professor tell me they don't see how it will be practical in the real world. You see, I'm totally deaf. Yes, in both ears. I hear nothing. I lost my hearing as a toddler. Even with that minor hurdle, I led a pretty normal, almost boring life. At least that was the case before. Now, not so much. One day I came home from work at my usual time. I let myself into my place and went about my normal weekday evening routine. I watched an episode from the DVR while I warmed up last night's leftovers before treating myself to a long bath. It was as hot as I could stand. I even went wild and threw a bath bomb and a glass of my favorite wine into the mix. That's when it first started. When I got out and grabbed my towel, it was still slightly damp. I felt a couple of moist spots before shaking my head. Odd but not alarming. After pulling back the blankets and crawling between the fresh clean sheets, I was out before my head fully hit the pillow. The next morning's incident was a bit more concerning. After stumbling out of bed, I shuffled from the bathroom to the kitchen to make some nectar of the gods. I'm useless without it. I stopped dead in my tracks when I opened the coffee can, and the measuring scoop that belongs in there was missing. Impossible. I never take it out. Even if I did, where would I have put it? I looked around the small apartment-sized kitchen. My confusion grew when my eyes rested on the dish drainer. There, set propped up to dry, was the coffee scoop. I examined it closely, though not sure why. Maybe I was expecting to find that it had sprouted legs or something. I don't know. I used it and tossed it back into the tin after finding no magical answers. At work I found out that I was being given a raise. In the excitement, the coffee incident was the last thing on my mind when I walked in the door that Friday night from celebrating with a few friends. I had drank few too many, and felt like I needed to crawl into bed while I still could. A shower was out of the question, and even the drawer with my pajamas seemed too far to reach. Without hesitation, I tossed the clothes aside as I stripped out of them. Not even pulling back the blankets, I collapsed and fell into my alcohol-induced non-existence. The sun was already warming the room when I opened my eyes the next morning. Panicking a bit before remembering it's Saturday, I sat up and looked over at my useless blinds, and the sun that pried its way in. That's when I noticed the other side of the bed. It looked as if someone had been laying there. Had it been me? I could swear it wasn't, but just in case I lost more of last night than I could remember, I looked over at the bathroom door. It was open. I got up and knocked before peeking my head in. No one was there. I went through the apartment but couldn't find the mystery figure to match the outline of the bed, guessing that it had to have been me. Though that conclusion was a stretch, it was time to get ready for the day. I was supposed to meet my sister for lunch, and I couldn't wait to tell her the news. But before I jumped in, the bathtub had another puzzle for me. It was wet. Glancing in the mirror, there was no question. I did not take a shower last night and just forget. My makeup was smeared all over my face, and the pillows I had been laying on. It hit me like a ton of bricks, almost running back into the bedroom. I picked up and examined the pillows on what is usually the unoccupied side of the bed. Nothing. No makeup at all. Yet the pillows I had slept on were splotched all over with it. What was going on? I immediately went around and checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked up tight. I had never felt so unsafe and uncertain as I did right then. Not knowing what else to do, I pushed it all to the side and carried on with my day's plans. After a lot of internal debate, I told my sister Lindsay about that morning. She looked concerned, but seemed to shake it off, signing, "You know how you get after a night out. You probably just forgot about bringing someone home," and he got up, took a shower, and locked up after himself like a gentleman. I gave her a shut up look, and we both laughed. I was willing to buy it. At least it was some type of plausible explanation. That didn't last long though. Getting home, I went to put the lunch leftovers in the fridge. Opening it, there was groceries I hadn't bought. Milk, sandwich meat, a new can of coffee, beer, frickin' Froot Loops. Not to mention the bread suddenly on top of the counter. I screamed and backed away before darting out the back door. Once I was locked safely in my car and sitting in my driveway, I started attempting to pull myself together. When I could breathe again, and was sure I wasn't going to hyperventilate myself into unconsciousness, it was time to do something. My first thought, of course, was to contact the police. Picking up the phone, I opened the app before a question crossed my mind that stopped me in my tracks. What was I going to tell them? Someone broke into my house and bought me groceries, used my bathtub and towel, laid on my bed. I had cash lying on the counter. My purse was there while I slept. My jewelry, electronics, everything. All available but still there. What sense did that make? I again started to lose it. It took 20 minutes or so before I could stop shaking enough to text my sister. She came over right away. I was glad I hadn't called the police because I felt paranoid and delusional enough just explaining it to Lindsay. We went through the apartment, room by room, looking in my bedroom, bathroom, the living room, coat closet, even behind the drapes. We checked all locks on the windows and engaged the deadbolt on the front door. Even though I could tell that Lindsay was going through the motions more to help calm me more than anything else. She was the parent checking under the child's bed for monsters. By that time, it was already late, and she said she would just sleep over for the night in my guest room. I was beyond grateful. I think I slept better that night than I had all week. The next morning we got ready, and decided that I needed a mental health day. We stopped in and got a manicure and pedicure, grabbed lunch at her favorite restaurant, and then decided to do some shopping. I was walking by an electronics store when I got a great idea. I wasn't going to be able to let it go until I found out what was really going on. I went in and bought some of the lower grade security cameras that could wirelessly send feed that you watch on your phone or laptop. I instantly felt less vulnerable. Lindsay suggested staying over that night after the new cameras were set up. I told her that there was no need. She still texted me when she got home to make sure everything seemed to be going okay. I told her that it was, or so I believed. Sunday's usually my nuh-uh day. If asked if I want to, we'll do anything. The answer is usually nuh-uh. That normally includes even getting dressed. Naturally, I was smiling as I sat up and stepped out of bed, heading for the bathroom. I wasn't able to hold the urge back, however, when I walked in and in my cup was a second toothbrush. Water still dripping off of it. Without thinking, I ran into my front room and brought up the cameras. I almost passed out as I watched what played out on the screen. It was me, going through my nightly routine, and he was simply feet from me, all night. The cheap cameras were clear enough. There was my coworker Eric, who had asked me out a time or two, and I had turned down. He was careful, but never very far. He knew I couldn't really see him, so that all he had to do was stay out of my line of sight. And that was something he had evidently mastered. I ate dinner. He stood in the kitchen, where he could see me, but not be immediately visible if I turned my head suddenly. You could see his mouth moving. He seemed to be talking to me, knowing that I couldn't hear him. If I went to the shower, he would go through my most personal things. I watched him stand by the television in the living room with his phone, recording me coming out of the shower and dressing. At night after I fell asleep, he would lay down on the floor beside my side of the bed. I guess he learned his lesson after being bold enough to lay beside me the nights I came home drunk. He was even circling around me as I took a late nap on the couch. When I came back from walking out to get the mail, he was just behind the front door. My house was his at night, or when I had gone out. My blood ran cold when I switched views to the spare room, when I watched him open the window and disappear this morning as I woke up. Nothing after that. He just slipped away. I shivered almost uncontrollably before deciding to post here, something to keep my mind off of what was going on. Wait, as I sit here and type, I saw movement in the glare of the screen. He's standing right behind me. I don't think that he can see what I'm typing. What should I do? For some context, we're gonna have to go back a little. It was 2016 when I moved into this house. Me, my brother, and my mom. From the start, things have just been off. The first occurrence was before we even moved in properly. It was still in the decorating stage. Bare floors, the old owner's wallpaper peeling from the walls. We did all the decorating ourselves as at that point, we couldn't really afford any decorators. I decided to go with a pale blue/gray for my room, and my brother went with a dark gray. A gray that my mother complained about. She said, "It's too dark, you'll have no light." My brother always liked his room dark though. It was late at night and I had been painting all day. I was really impressed at how clean of a job I had done, considering back then I was only 16. I remember my mom yelling upstairs to get ready to go back to the old house, as the house we were moving into wasn't quite suitable for living in yet. I put the lid on my paint, set down my roller, and left my room. We locked up, went back home, and the next night we came back. I didn't help my mom elsewhere this time, as I was eager to finish the painting in my room. I got to my room and everything looked normal, just like any other day. Only this time when I looked down at the floor to the painting tray, where my roller lay, my heart dropped. I remember the sudden urge of panic coming over me. What was I looking at? It was impossible. At my feet was a handprint in the paint, made from my brother's paint, one much larger than mine, or my mother's, even my brother's. The first thing I did was check my brother's room. There was nothing. His paint was where he left it. I asked him if he was trying to play a prank on me, and he was as confused as I was. I couldn't find any reasonable sense for it. My brother's room was down the hall, the stairs separating both of our rooms. There was no way the paint could have been anywhere near my room. I was so confused that I used a new tray, and I left the handprint to dry. I still have it in my attic. That was the first thing I couldn't understand. It makes the hairs on my arms stand up even thinking about it. Soon enough the room was ready to move in, around 3 weeks after it happened. Nothing else seemed to occur, so slowly but surely it didn't cross my mind, and I just went on like any other house I'd lived in. Until one night, after living there for around 4 months. Our dog was a few months old then. He started barking at the back left corner of our living room, while we were sat around having a family movie night. His hair began to stand up. My mom believes in spirits, and that animals can see things that we can't. She looked at me and said, "Take a picture with your iPad." I was skeptical and we kinda laughed and joked about it, as I unlocked my iPad and opened the camera. I didn't even have time to take a picture. I lifted my iPad while looking at the screen, and I panned it around to where the dog was barking. I froze. I wanted to run, but I was too afraid. Every part of my brain screamed run, but I couldn't. I just looked at my mom. She told me I'd turn pale white. That night I spent 3 hours outside on the curb, refusing to come back in. When I looked at the screen of my iPad, across the corner I saw a gray figure. No features or anything. Hardly even a body. The head and the shoulders were outlined perfectly. It just walked across the corner, then it was gone. It happened so fast. I'd never seen a ghost before. So yeah, it messed me up pretty bad. I couldn't believe what I saw was actually a ghost. A few months had passed and nothing really happened. And again, my paranoia of sleeping alone in my room at night wore away. My mom had made friends with an old lady across the road. She's the typical chatting woman, with a lifetime of stories. In conversation, it had come up who the previous owners of the house were. The old woman told us it was a man called Matthew. He got really sick. So sick that he couldn't use the stairs, so he moved into the bedroom downstairs. He had his bed in the back left corner. She told us that because sometimes she'd care for him. He passed away in his bed, exactly where my dog barks. This made me a little bit relieved, because I knew it wasn't like a demon or anything. It's just a spirit who happens to be here. Then nothing happened until yesterday. I got out of the shower. It was around 12 as I was drying in the bathroom, which is right next to my room, and I heard a deep voice. Matthew. Chills ran down my spine. There was no one here with a voice that deep. It couldn't have been the spirit of Matthew. He couldn't call out his own name. Who else is here with us? What else?